When I was in my first year of college, I lived with my mom by ourselves. My dad had passed away the year before, and we moved out of the house shortly after. I was glad because I had suffered a lot of paranormal trauma growing up there and was glad to get out. One night, I was driving home on Highway 111 North, after a youth group, and I saw something that still bewilders me. It was lightly raining that night. Mist crawled across the road from the cowfields on either side. The lights from the few gas stations nearby were reflected in the wet asphalt. I was driving about 3 car lengths behind a dark minivan, with nobody else in sight on the roads. All of a sudden, I saw the van swerve to miss something in the middle of the road. I was going too fast, and the road was too slick to miss it. All of a sudden, I saw, framed in my headlights and silhouetted in the glowing red brake lights of the van speeding away, a tall, muscular man with the upper shoulders and head of a buck. It was like a minotaur, but a deer head instead of a bull, and glowing red eyes. I clinched and braced for impact, and then passed right through the figure. It was like it dissolved right into the mist. I am used to swerving to miss deer at night, but I should have nailed this thing with the driver's side. But nothing. I was afraid to look in the rearview mirror as I gasped and sped home. I was only a couple miles away, which was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. I raced in the door and locked it behind me. I told my mom, who laughed it off, but was disconcerted at my pale, clammy complexion. I only later found out in research a being described like what I saw, the Wendigo. A Native American legend that was terrifying to me as a child, but I had never heard it described like this. I had never heard of any creature like this until that night on Dark Highway 111 that I will never forget.
Just to give some background about this story, I was visiting my grandparents out in Shiprock, New Mexico during last October to see a family and to go to the Northern Navajo Nation Fair that week. As many of you might know, many Navajo people, including my own family, are very reluctant to speak about skinwalkers because it is believed to attract their attention. Well, I, however, grew up away from the Navajo Nation and was very naive about the subject. When it came to skinwalkers, I was an absolute skeptic. My mom used to tell a story of how back in the 80s when she lived with her siblings and my grandparents, still in Shiprock but the southern outskirts, about how she and my aunt saw a skinwalker just outside their driveway under a streetlight. She described it as a black dog with dirty fur, a twisted noodle-like front leg, and these unnatural eyes with a soft burn orange glow. Me, being my own closed-minded self, doubted every word, but I never said my doubts aloud. But these doubts totally changed last year when I went to my grandparents' house last October. Me and my family had just finished scourging the carnival at the Navajo Nation Fair and called it a night. The house was close enough where we could walk home in just 10 minutes, so we did. When we got there, it was about 9 at night, where we stayed up until 2 catching up about family affairs and the local news. It was during that time that I just decidedly opened my mouth and blurted out the question, "Hey, are skinwalkers real?" Suddenly, room gets dead silent. "Guys?" I asked. "You shouldn't be speaking about that," my grandma said, with almost a disturbed yell in her voice. So she and my grandfather both decided to go to bed. After being scolded by my mom, one of my aunts chimes in with a very cautious tone and says, "They're real, alright." Had a few start screaming outside of my trailer in Farmington. Just a few nights ago, your cousin had nightmares the whole night and woke up crying that morning. Not wanting to push the discomfort any further, we all decided to go to bed. Now, the trailer/home is pretty old, and it was a really nice night, so we slept with the windows open with screens to prevent bugs coming in. Everyone had drifted off to sleep except me, because my mind was still going a million miles a minute about skinwalkers, and wondered if I ever encountered one. While here on the reservation, as a kid, I was told it's taboo to think about skinwalkers because it can still call their attention. That's when the shit totally hit the fan, just as I was settling and finally getting relaxed for sleep. I started to hear something moving outside. I get up from the couch and start wandering over the kitchen window. In the trailer, all of the rooms have the lights out, so the only visible light that can be seen is from the porch light out front. I was thankful for this because I told myself if it really was a skinwalker outside, then hopefully it wouldn't notice me seeing it. So I muster up the courage and take a quick scan outside. From the porch light, all I can see is the dusty ground and the vehicles that my family drove along with some old metal trash cans that stood beside the road. Looking for about a good 5 seconds, I wasn't able to see anything, so I was getting ready to turn around and walk back to bed, thinking it was just a stray cat or something. Only have taken 2 steps, I hear what sounded like a distorted scream coming from outside. Definitely close by. Fear rising. I look outside again, and there I see it. A coyote-like figure was staring at my direction from behind the cars, just outside of the reach of the porch light. Only it looked awfully wrong, and gave off an evil vibe from seeing it. It was gray, with very deceitful hair, and a horrific orange-red soft glow came from its eyes. I noped the hell out and ran back to the bedroom. It was at that moment I had begun to also notice an awful stench in the air that smelled like rotting meat. I started trying to wake up my mom, who was like, "Oh my god, it's almost 3 a.m. What do you want?" I immediately began in shaken voice, "There's something scary outside." Then she said, now annoyed because I woke her up, "It's probably just a stray animal or something. It's the res. Animals wander all the time at night." She obviously wasn't getting the drift of what I was saying, so I screamed, "There's some Blair Witch Project shit going on outside, Mom." That got her attention. "What? What the hell are you talking about?" she said. Then we heard it. The thing outside started making more of its dreadful-like screams, and started what sounded like thrashing outside on the ground. Hear that? That's what I'm talking about. So both her and I got back up, looked outside, and the coyote thing was making its way to the door. It walked with an odd limp and dragged its back right leg as if it has handicapped. We could hear it, and it start to screech against the door and make this odd muffled moaning sound. My mom went and got my dad, and they both started to shout in Navajo all sorts of words, telling the thing to go away and saying it's not welcome here. Well, all this commotion was enough to get the rest of the trailer up as they came out of the hallway. The only thing my mom did was to turn them and said "Skinwalker," while proceeding to point at the door. Noise is still happening. Apparently they already knew exactly what to do, as my grandfather got out a handgun from a drawer and a bag of ashes. He coated a few bullets and loaded them into the gun and went straight to the door. Yelling out Navajo that was too fast for me to comprehend, he swung open the door and fired twice. Nothing. The thing managed to escape before my grandpa could put a bullet in it. "That's the fastest one I have ever seen," said my grandpa. Next thing you know, my aunt and my parents are freaking out about what just happened, saying stuff like, "What if it comes back tomorrow?" and "It saw us." Does that mean we're targets now? Afterwards, my grandparents calmed everyone down, myself included, saying we'll be fine, and we all went to bed around 3-ish. Morning comes and my grandparents call one of the neighbors and explain to them what happened. Apparently one of them was a medicine man who used to partake in Yebi Shai's Navajo ceremonies used for healing and curing sickness, and came over to bless each family member and the grounds outside. Today, I'm very convinced that what I saw was a Skinwalker. I still plan on going back for visits to my family and the Northern Navajo Nation Fair. Fun stuff. I just adamantly hope that I never have such an awful experience like that again. Now, here's something else. I am going back to stay with my grandparents for a week late next month for a cousin's graduation from high school. And if there happens to be another encounter of any sort, well, now I know where I can share my experience.
I'm staying with my future brother-in-law. His house is 10-ish miles from town and a mile from the closest neighbors. Sister spends the weekends here. It started a few days ago. We had just got home from work. I sat down and I heard someone repeatedly saying, "Hello?" at my front door. I got up to answer it. My brother-in-law told me to stop and looked out the window. I did too. There was no one there. He said to ignore it and not open the door unless I can see someone there. Sometimes at night, I swear, I hear a girl crying outside the laundry room. He said that it's just a deer. I've never heard a deer sound like that before. My sister heard it too, but she says it's almost sounded like a teenage girl was repeating Winyan, a Sioux word for woman. I spoke to my sister, and she insists that her fiancé, my future brother-in-law, would never put us in any danger. My brother-in-law just says not to go outside if I hear anything and never try to speak to it. I checked into the history and the house and general area. Nothing stands out. I don't smoke, drink, or do drugs. There's carbon monoxide detectors, so that's not a problem. I asked him if it was something of the Wendigo or Skinwalker nature. He said Skinwalkers are Navajo and Wendigo are Cree, not Sioux, and not to speak about this subject at night. He said that if I'm that curious, he'll show me. At about 9 that night, we went outside. His neighbor Peter, he lives about a mile away, joined us. Apparently, whatever it is, likes to do the same thing at his house. He's too scared to leave his wife and kids home alone when the power goes out. We were pretty deep in the woods when my brother-in-law stopped and made a dove call. It was answered by the same call a few seconds later. There's no doves here in January. That's when the knock started. It moved to tree, with no real pattern. We still couldn't see anything. Then there was this overwhelming sense of dread. Peter and I looked at each other, then hightail it back to the house. Peter is completely flipping his shit and goes home. I asked my brother-in-law what's going on. He said he's not quite sure. It started last winter. He's never seen it, but it liked to make noises outside the stables at work. It went away during the spring and the summer, and then started up again here. He also said that the same thing used to happen to him when he was a child up until 15. Just one thing bothers me. He got back to the house about 2 minutes after Peter and I did. There's no way I'm faster than my brother-in-law. And Peter's close to 50, so there's no way he outran a 24-year-old. What was he doing out there alone with whatever that is for 2 minutes? I asked him. He said he shot at it. I didn't hear a gun, and neither did Peter. My grandma is from Mexico, and as some people know, Mexico does have natives like in the US. I've been a part of a line of natives that trace down to South America. My grandma told me a story that really stood out among the others. Since this one is particularly talked about on the internet, here is her story. She was going to a destination. The destination was unclear. The road was bumpy, as it was a very busy road. For some reason, the road was completely empty. It was evening tide, and there were no city lights. Keep in mind that this isn't a road that has lights. She drove down the road without any music. She just listened to the outside. All the windows were open. Suddenly, she felt a pang of dread, and stopped on the road. These windows were roll-up windows, so she couldn't automatically roll them up. She took a small break on the road, when she faintly hears a low groan of a dog. It sounded like a dying dog, and she knew that sound very well. My grandmother's dog died. She slowly moved the car to the corner, when in the light of the car she saw a long black dog with glowing yellow eyes, drenched in blood. In the middle it was sort of bent. The dog began to moan like a human, and my grandma began reversing the car quickly. The dog ran with immense speed towards the car, but it didn't run like an ordinary dog. She managed to speed forward in the same road again. She felt like she was drained of energy, and she got into my uncle's restaurant to tell the story. Lately, I've found out about Wendigos, and lo and behold, Wendigos almost look exactly like she described. You'd think a person who lived in a haunted house would be used to the paranormal. But Skinwalkers are not the paranormal. They are equivalent to a witch and a monster. They were once medicine men, but what happens is they turn to a more darker side. In order to become a Skinwalker, they must become a medicine man, or already be a medicine man. Then, they have to kill a member of their family. It's just like in The Conjuring, how the lady who had her baby sacrificed to Satan when it was only 7 days old. I always thought of it like that. Since medicine men are considered holy and healers in the Navajo Nation, Skinwalkers can chant curses, use rituals to fatally harm a person. Sometimes they blow powdered bones to a person, that way they can become sick and left untreated to die. They are also known to shapeshift into anything. If you ever drive on long roads at night on the reservation, many people are scared to look out of the window, in fear that they will see a shadow running alongside their vehicle. They are evil, and they are real, and I encountered one of their houses. Every year, my mom's side of the family has an annual family campout in the Tisali Woods on the Navajo Reservation. We camp out at Grandpa's sheep camp. The whole camp has a circle clearing, so we are able to set up our tents. That year, I brought alongside my cousin from my dad's side, Gabby. This was the time I was youthful, energetic, and could run around for hours without feeling like I was dying. At dusk, me and Gabby were playing hide-and-seek in the woods. It wasn't far out. It was just enough that we could see the campsite still. At the time, I guess I wasn't concerned about danger, because I thought that since my whole family was less than a mile away, they could reach me if I was in danger. As the day got darker, we were ready to head back, when I noticed a light in the clearing. Something felt weird, as though the air got heavy. The woods now seemed like it had a gray atmosphere. The trees felt like they had no life, and that the leaves seemed brittle and brown. Everything looked the same, mind you, but I felt as though the woods somehow changed. When I started walking towards the light, I came across the house. The structure seemed more like a small hut, leaning against a big tree. It was facing the opposite of east, which I thought was weird since most houses or Hogan's have the door facing east, so that it will get hit with the first light of dawn in the morning. The structure was also made out of nothing but tree bark, and the inside seemed to be lined with fur. But there was a little open window where the light was coming from. There seemed to have been drawings in the side of the hut, drawn with black charcoal. Me and my cousin passed as we looked at the house, contemplating what to do. I wanted to go closer and face this house, because I didn't want to lay awake at night wondering what it was. As I got closer, my cousin started to have this panic feeling overwhelm her. She kept asking me to leave and run to the campground. I didn't want to, but that was when the light was blown out. At that moment, I realized someone was in there. We both ran back to the campground, and I was shaking, constantly looking back. That didn't help because I kept thinking I was seeing a dark shadow hiding among the trees. When we reached the camp area, we told my sister what happened. She scolded us, saying that there might have been skinwalkers in the woods. Since last week, as my uncle was getting the campground ready, there had been a sighting of a mountain lion around the camp. Of course, the next morning, I went back to the forest to see if the structure was still there. It wasn't. Nothing, as though I had imagined the whole thing. I walked around the entire place, staying close to the hiking trail as to not get lost, and I couldn't find anything. As a teenager, I would visit my grandma at her home on the Navajo reservation for several weeks every summer. I loved to spend time with her, eat her delicious fried bread, and hear her tell us stories. Every so often, my grandma would hire a worker, the harmless town drunk, to do odd jobs around her house and property. One evening, right before the sun went down, I was asked by my grandma to take him home, which was about 4 miles out of the valley where she lived. I was more than happy to, seeing that I was only 14 years old and was asked to drive a truck. Mind you, on that reservation, nobody cares that you're only 14 years old and driving around. Hell, there's hardly anybody to see you. So my 9-year-old brother jumped in the truck cab with me while this worker and my dog shared the tailgate of the truck, and we were off. After I dropped the worker off at the shack that he and his brother called a house, we headed back down the road to Grandma's. As I mentioned before, it was evening and the sky was a deep red as the sun began to set behind us. We were leaving a nice dust trail from the dirt road, and the radio was playing music from the only radio station that could be picked up from the nearest town of Holbrook, Arizona. There was nothing unusual and nothing weird. It was at this time that my eye caught movement of something in the bushes a little up the road to the right of us. I remember slowing down, thinking it was one of the many free roaming sheep in the area that would dart out in front of the truck. As I passed where I thought I saw it, I sped up, thinking nothing else of it. Then, out of nowhere, I just felt this dark feeling and fear of dread. I had no idea why I was feeling this way, but I definitely felt that something was wrong. As I play this memory back in my mind, there was only a few clear memories that I have of that evening. I clearly remember looking in my rearview mirror and seeing a dark silhouette of something very tall and very skinny that seemed to be covered in some kind of hair or fur running behind the truck after us. Whatever it wasn't a normal human or human at all. I remember hearing my brother crying and my dog barking ferociously at whatever was chasing us. I remember speeding very fast and shaking violently as the truck bounced on the washboard dirt road. I distinctly remember that this thing was only getting closer as my brother cried, "It's coming up on your side." I remember being as scared as hell and thinking that I didn't want to die. At the moment that I thought would be our last, I remember speeding around a bend in the road and seeing a car coming towards us in the opposite direction. At that moment, I felt instant relief and felt that whatever was following us was gone. Shaken up but alive, we made it to Grandma's house wondering what the hell just happened. Shaken up but alive, we made it to Grandma's house wondering what the hell just happened. We ran inside, not looking back, hoping that whatever was chasing us had not followed us home. As we told my grandma about our experience, she didn't seem too surprised. which surprised us. She continued by repeating stories that we had already heard at one point or another about black magic, witches, and something that the Navajos call Yee-na-de-lushi, or skinwalkers. Needless to say, I didn't even want to look out any of my windows at all the rest of that night. As a matter of fact, I never drove on the reservation at night until I was 21 years old. Without going into deep explanation, I'll just say that these skinwalkers are evil men and spirits that use black magic for evil doing. I tell you that as far-fetched as it may sound, they are real. I believe that if God and his greatness are real, the devil is equally as real and also has his way of showing himself.